The series begins with a young boy named Ji-young, who is attending the trial for the case of his mother's death. The man who killed his mom is named Sung-soo, and now he is about to be sentenced by the judge. However, Sung-soo has already apologized and claimed to have struggled with mental health issues, leading the judge to sentence him to only 3.5 years in prison. Upon hearing this, Ji-young can do nothing but weep. To him, the punishment is utterly unjust, especially since Sung-soo had brutally taken his mother's life right in front of him. As Sung-soo is being led away to prison, he flashes a sinister smile at Ji-young, a gesture that haunts the boy. 12 years later, Sung-soo is now a free man, and he quickly returns to his cruel ways. He viciously assaults a bus driver over a trivial matter. After venting his rage, Sung-soo notices a mysterious man watching him from a distance. Soon after, when Sung-soo finds himself in a narrow alley, he grows increasingly irritated as the mysterious man continues to follow him. At one moment, the stranger finally speaks, declaring that he has come to enforce justice in his own way. Annoyed by the intrusion, Sung-soo attacks the man, but to his shock, he is overpowered and left severely injured. Cornered and helpless, Sung-soo listens as the mysterious man reveals his identity. It is Ji-young, the son of the woman he had murdered all those years ago. Without hesitation, Ji-young exacts his revenge, and Sung-soo meets his end. Later, Ji-young returns home and gazes at a childhood photo of himself with his mother. It becomes clear that Ji-young has taken it upon himself to mete out brutal justice to criminals who evade the law or receive lenient sentences that don't match the severity of their crimes. Sometime later, we are introduced to a senior police officer named Jun-yob, who is teaching at the police academy. Unexpectedly, Ji-young is now a student there. During a class, Ji-young asks Jun-yob why so many criminals who commit heinous acts receive light punishments. At that moment, Jun-yob explains that this often happens due to a lack of evidence, or because law enforcement officials are weak and susceptible to bribery. After class, Ji-young practices judo at the police headquarters. Impressed by Ji-young's skills, Jun-yob expresses confidence that Ji-young is ready to take on fieldwork and solve cases. On weekends, all students at the police academy are allowed to go home. As Ji-young prepares to leave, he meets his friends, Shan-wook and Hwang-jun. The three are incredibly close, having shared a dorm room at the police academy and bonded over their shared journey through training. As Ji-young nears his home, it becomes evident that he is an exceptionally kind and approachable person. He doesn't hesitate to lend a hand to his neighbors in need. After helping them, Ji-young steps inside his house to relax, flipping on the TV to catch the news. At that moment, the broadcast reveals a disturbing story. Two men have brutally assaulted and disabled another man in their attempt to forcibly purchase his house. These same individuals have allegedly committed multiple murders in the past, yet they always manage to evade the law. Hearing this, Ji-young immediately turns to his computer, diving deep into the case to uncover the address of the house the criminals are targeting. Sometime later, the two men from the news are seen intimidating a woman and her son, pressuring them to leave their home. Earlier, they had already beaten the woman's husband into a state of permanent disability, as reported. Soon after, when the two men shamelessly defile the property, Ji-young suddenly appears and swiftly ends their lives, ensuring they can never harm anyone again. Upon returning home, Ji-young comes across another troubling news story. This time, it's about a plastic surgeon who has been sexually assaulting his patients during procedures, recording his heinous acts. Despite his crimes, the surgeon is a wealthy man and has only been sentenced to 3 months in prison. Shockingly, his medical license remains intact. Not long after, when the surgeon attempts to resume his vile practices, Ji-young intervenes. He brutally assaults the man, breaking his hands but sparing his life. At that moment, Ji-young warns the surgeon to cease his operations immediately, threatening to finish him off if he dares to continue. The next day, a red-haired journalist named Choi Mir-yo meets with her boss, Chang-hyun. She excitedly tells him that she has gathered an incredible story, one that's ready to be published and broadcasted. Surprisingly, the story revolves around the mysterious figure who has been taking justice into his own hands. Mirio explains that this unknown man has been filling the gaps left by the country's weak legal system, which often fails to protect the poor and vulnerable. At that moment, she proposes naming this enigmatic figure Vigilante. However, no one, not even Mirio, knows the true identity of Vigilante. The news story quickly becomes a sensation across South Korea. While the public largely supports Vigilante's actions, law enforcement officials are less enthusiastic. Ji-young and his two friends, Shan-wook and Hwang-jun, also hear about the report. Interestingly, despite being police trainees, Shan-wook and Hwang-jun openly express their support for Vigilante. The following day at the news office, Mirio notices her team celebrating. The company's ratings have skyrocketed thanks to the Vigilante story. As a result, Mirio confidently declares that their ratings will continue to rise, as Vigilante is likely to strike again every weekend. Meanwhile, Ji-young is busy researching another case of injustice. At one moment, he stumbles upon the story of a drunk driver named Chi-hyun, who killed someone in a hit-and-run accident but was never arrested. Not long after, a woman was seen berating Chi-hyun, blaming him for her husband's death in a car accident caused by his reckless behavior. Chi-hyun repeatedly apologized, swearing that he would never drink again. Unexpectedly, Ji-young appeared at the scene, ready to punish the drunkard. However, after hearing Chi-hyun's sincere apology and promise to reform, Ji-young decided to spare him. Meanwhile, Mirio and Chang-hyun were growing frustrated. Apparently, Vigilante had been inactive over the weekend, leaving them without any news to report. After discussing the matter with Chang-hyun, Mirio came up with an idea. They would bait Vigilante by revisiting a case from 2015. It was revealed that in 2015, a man had committed a heinous act, but due to a weak legal system, the perpetrator had walked free and was still at large. Mirio believed that if their media outlet brought the case back into the spotlight, Vigilante would inevitably target the perpetrator. Acting on her plan, Mirio instructed a TV presenter to report on the case, even boldly displaying the perpetrator's photo, Do-kung, and his full address. Unexpectedly, Ji-young happened to catch the news report. The next day, the story spread like wildfire, sparking outrage among the public. A group of citizens gathered outside Do-kung's house to protest, furious that he had escaped justice. As the noise continued to increase, Do-kung finally appeared at the window, shouting at the protesters to leave him alone. Moments later, Do-kung went about his day, eating and watching TV as if nothing had happened. That night, under the cover of heavy rain and darkness, Do-kung quietly planned his escape. He drove his pickup truck to a nearby dock, unaware that Mirio was tailing him. However, when she arrived at the dock, she lost track of him among the many similar-looking pickup trucks parked there. The next day, public pressure forced the police to visit Do-kung's house, only to find it empty. Soon after, they received a tip that Do-kung was at the dock, likely planning to flee. In response, the police rushed to the scene, while two officers were assigned to guard the home of Do-kung's past victim. At the dock, the police began searching every boat for Do-kung. Unexpectedly, Mirio and Chang-hyun were already there, ready to cover the story and ensure their media outlet would be the first to report on Do-kung's arrest. However, as night fell, the police still hadn't found him, as the dock was crowded with countless boats. Meanwhile, one of the officers guarding the victim's house was called to assist in the search at the dock, leaving only one officer on duty. Shortly after, Do-kung arrived at the victim's house, wearing a helmet and posing as a delivery man. The remaining officer grew suspicious, and a scuffle broke out between them. In a shocking turn of events, Do-kung threw hot liquid in the officer's face, leaving him incapacitated. At the same time, the victim emerged from the house, and Do-kung dragged her away. On the staircase, Do-kung angrily accused the girl of reigniting his case, believing she was responsible for the renewed media attention. Just as he was about to harm her, Ji-young, the vigilante, arrived in the nick of time and delivered a powerful kick, saving the girl from certain danger. Without hesitation, Ji-young swiftly incapacitated Do-kung. After he was severely injured, Ji-young ordered Do-kung to write something on the wall before finally ending his life. Shortly after, the police arrived, and Mirio slipped inside, pretending to be a resident of the apartment. As she climbed the stairs, Miryeo couldn't help but smile upon knowing that the vigilante had taken the bait. The message Dokong had scrawled in his own blood confirmed it. The vigilante would judge the wicked and corrupt. Meanwhile, Ji-young had changed his clothes and was strolling casually through the city. He vowed to continue his mission as the vigilante, believing that South Korea's legal system was unreliable. Not only that, he saw himself as filling the gaps left by its failures. The following day, news of Dokong's death at the hands of the vigilante once again sent shockwaves through South Korea. Most of the public supported the vigilante, seeing him as a champion for the weak and oppressed who had been denied justice. However, the police were furious. They viewed the vigilante as a rogue who had overstepped their authority. As a result, Incheon's police chief declared the vigilante the most wanted fugitive in the city. Some time later, Junyob was summoned by the Incheon police chief to assist in the investigation of Dokong's death. Junyob asked Ji-young and Shan-wook to lead a discussion with the other students while he attended to his duties. When Junyob arrived at the scene, he found no clues. It was as if the vigilante knew exactly how the police operated. As Junyob pondered this, a young girl approached him. She expressed her confusion over why the police were hunting the vigilante when he was doing what the people wanted, delivering justice in a way the police had failed to do. Meanwhile, Miryeo and Changhyun were under pressure from law enforcement. Their media outlet was accused of glorifying the vigilante's actions. But Miryeo reminded her team that ratings were what mattered most. In fact, she had already set the stage for the vigilante's next move by preparing another criminal to serve as bait. Later, Ji-young, Shan-wook, and Hwangjun were working out together, discussing the vigilante. At that moment, Shan-wook remarked that the vigilante's intelligence and skill were almost on par with Ji-young's. In response, Ji-young remained silent, knowing full well that he was the vigilante. Not long after, Miryeo released a news story about a man named Diop who had committed a heinous crime, murdering an entire family, including their 2 young children. It was revealed that Diop had carried out the act with an underage accomplice named Sung Yeol. Not only that, Diop even pinned the blame on Sung Yeol, who received a light sentence due to his age. That night, Ji-young, intrigued by the case, used a police computer to dig into Diop's background. He soon discovered Diop's and Sung Yeol's social media accounts, which revealed that the two often frequented a nightclub. As a result, Ji-young knew where to find them. When the weekend arrived, Ji-young, Shan-wook, and Hwangjun were seen preparing to head home. At one moment, Shan-wook and Hwangjun invited Ji-young to join them for a night out at a club, something Ji-young had always refused in the past. But this time, to their surprise, Ji-young agreed. However, his intentions were far from recreational. He wasn't there to have fun. He was there to find Diop, who was known to frequent the club. As they entered the bustling nightclub, Ji-young scanned the room. It didn't take long for him to spot Diop, who was lounging casually with Sung Yeol. At that moment, Ji-young kept his distance, blending into the crowd while keeping a close eye on his target. Unexpectedly, a woman approached Ji-young, drawn to his striking looks. Soon after, she invited him to share a drink. Though Ji-young obliged, his attention never wavered from Diop and Sung Yeol, who were deep in conversation. At that moment, Diop boasted to Sung Yeol about how easy it was to manipulate South Korea's legal system. He revealed that he had deliberately involved Sung Yeol in the brutal murder of a family, framing him as the perpetrator. Thanks to bribes and his status as a minor, Diop had received a light sentence, while Sung Yeol had barely been punished at all. Ji-young, overhearing the conversation, felt a surge of anger. He silently vowed to bring Diop to justice. However, the woman accompanying him noticed his intense focus on Diop. Mistaking his interest, she assumed Ji-young was looking to buy drugs from Diop, who was rumored to be a dealer. As a result, she led Ji-young to a quieter spot, hoping to steer him away from trouble. Unexpectedly, the woman's flirtatious advances distracted Ji-young, and before he knew it, he had let his guard down. By the time he regained his composure, the opportunity to confront Diop had slipped away. Frustrated, Ji-young returned to the dormitory as the weekend came to an end. That night, Ji-young found himself staring at a photo of the 2 young children Diop had mercilessly killed. The image fueled his determination. He began investigating Du Yop's drug operations, but the man was meticulous, always staying one step ahead of the law. The following weekend, Ji-young decided to tail Du Yop. He followed him discreetly, eventually discovering that Du Yop conducted his drug transactions in a secluded area by the river. Not only that, Du Yop also stored his stash in a small riverside house, hidden from prying eyes. On the other hand, Chang Hyun was seen growing anxious as Vigilante had been inactive for 3 weeks, and the public's interest was waning. Miryo, however, remained calm. She assured Chang Hyun that the Vigilante was likely lying low, especially after being declared a wanted fugitive. Back at the club, Du Yop returned to his car after a night of revelry. He was startled to find a note stuck to his windshield. The message was chilling. It demanded that he turn himself in by contacting the phone number provided. Du Yop, unnerved, ordered Sung Yeol to call the number and report back. After making the call, Sung Yeol returned with shocking news. The number belonged to the South Korean National Narcotics Investigation Bureau. When Du Yop returned to the nightclub, he was thrown into a panic as the police suddenly arrived to conduct a raid. Fortunately, Du Yop managed to escape and hurried to the small riverside house where he stored his drugs, hoping to secure his stash. But when he arrived, he found the place empty. The drugs were gone, taken by none other than the Vigilante. Knowing this, Du Yop tried to attack Ji-young, but he swiftly overpowered him, delivering a brutal beating before setting the entire drug stash on fire. Ji-young then demanded that Du Yop repent for his crimes. But Du Yop refused, defiant to the end. Enraged, Ji-young continued to beat him until he was on the verge of death. Before delivering the final blow, Ji-young showed Du Yop a video of the 2 young children he had mercilessly murdered. The next day, Du Yop's body was discovered, sending shockwaves through both the police and the public. Support for the Vigilante grew even stronger, much to the dismay of law enforcement. The police felt humiliated by the Vigilante's actions, and Incheon's police chief made a public announcement. At that moment, the police chief warned the public against supporting the Vigilante, labeling him a criminal and reaffirming their commitment to capturing him. The police chief also revealed that he had requested assistance from the National Police Headquarters to bring the Vigilante to justice. Meanwhile, television networks began hosting debates about the Vigilante. Some criticized him on human rights grounds, while others defended his actions, arguing that he was a product of a failing justice system that had repeatedly failed to deliver fairness. At the same time, Chang Hyun and his team were celebrating. Their media company had seen a massive boost in ratings thanks to their coverage of the Vigilante. However, Miryo quickly put an end to their revelry. She reminded them that they couldn't afford to relax. They needed to keep pushing the Vigilante narrative to maintain their ratings. Since the Vigilante had begun his crusade, crime rates had plummeted. Many criminals had even turned themselves in, fearing his wrath. As a result, one police officer informed his colleague that the operation to capture the Vigilante would now be led by a high-ranking officer named Jo Hyun, known as the Monster. Some time later, Jo Hyun was seen brutally interrogating Sung Yeol. He demanded to know if Sung Yeol had ever suspected anyone of being the Vigilante. At that moment, Sung Yeol recalled the young man at the nightclub who had been watching them intently, someone who might very well be the Vigilante. With this information, the Monster released Sung Yeol and immediately contacted headquarters. He vowed to capture the Vigilante, dead or alive. Sometime later, people started imitating the Vigilante. They took it upon themselves to judge and punish criminals in their own brutal ways. However, their actions were different from Ji-young's methods. Unlike these copycats, Ji-young always sought to understand the root of the problem and was willing to spare those who showed genuine remorse. The imitators, on the other hand, acted recklessly, doling out punishment without bothering to uncover the full truth. This wave of vigilante justice caught the media's attention. News outlets quickly concluded that the public's declining trust in law enforcement had fueled this trend. People were taking matters into their own hands, inspired by the Vigilante. Jo Hyun, also known as the Monster, watched these reports with growing frustration. He was determined to capture the real Vigilante, Ji-young, whom he saw as nothing more than a criminal disguising his actions as heroism. On the other hand, Ji-young, who had also seen the news, was deeply troubled. He disliked the fact that his actions had inspired others to act recklessly. Seon-wook tried to reassure him by saying that people aren't imitating the vigilante while following him. It's because the media keeps sensationalizing the case. Despite this, Ji-young replied that none of this would have happened if the law had done its job and protected the victims. The next day, Jo-hyun urged his fellow officers to redouble their efforts to capture the real vigilante. He acknowledged that the task had become even more challenging now that copycats were muddying the waters. Jo-hyun also pointed out that criminals now feared the vigilante more than they feared the police. Meanwhile, Mir-yo was busy setting another trap for the real vigilante. She published a story about a truck driver named Gyu-ho, who had intentionally killed a delivery man. As a result, the story immediately caught Ji-young's attention. Later, Ji-young began investigating the case in detail, starting with CCTV footage of the incident. The footage revealed that Gyu-ho had initially hit the delivery man by accident. However, instead of taking him to the hospital, Gyu-ho had callously returned to his truck and run over him again, ensuring his death. Gyu-ho had done this to avoid the financial burden of medical expenses. As Ji-young was reviewing the footage, Seon-wook unexpectedly walked in on him. Caught off guard, Ji-young quickly claimed he was organizing files for a school assignment. But Seon-wook wasn't convinced. Something about Ji-young's behavior felt off, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. The following day, which happened to be a holiday, Gyu-ho was confronted by the delivery man's mother. She was furious that Gyu-ho had walked free after deliberately killing her son. But Gyu-ho arrogantly shouted at her and pushed her away, refusing to take responsibility for his actions. Unbeknownst to him, Ji-young was nearby, watching everything unfold. That evening, Gyu-ho was relaxing in a hot spring when the vigilante suddenly appeared and killed him without hesitation, without even asking if Gyu-ho wished to repent. However, this vigilante was an imposter. The real Ji-young was busy helping his elderly neighbor, Ara, sort through scrap metal. As a result, Ara thanked Ji-young warmly, as he was always there to lend her a hand. Shortly after, Ji-young caught a news report about Gyu-ho's death, with the killer claiming to be the vigilante. Sometime later, Jo-hyun arrived at the scene of Gyu-ho's murder. After investigating, he concluded that the killer was not the real vigilante, as the methods used were entirely different. Meanwhile, a rival media company to Mir-yo's outlet began reporting on the actions of the fake vigilante. This rival company even tried to bait the vigilante by publicizing the release of 3 recently freed criminals. However, Mir-yo quickly realized that the vigilante who had acted the previous night was not the real one. Soon after, the fake vigilante responded to the media's reports, ruthlessly killing the 3 criminals without hesitation. Not stopping there, the imposter boldly sent a video to the media, declaring his intention to continue his violent crusade. Jo-hyun, upon seeing the video, grew even more furious and vowed to capture the vigilante, whether real or fake. At the same time, Ji-young was visibly frustrated. His reputation as the real vigilante was being tarnished by this reckless imposter who acted without any sense of justice or restraint. A few days later, Ara, Ji-young's elderly neighbor, was berated by a man named Soon-do for blocking his path. Ara hurried to move her cart out of the way, but Soon-do, impatient and cruel, deliberately ran her over, killing her. The incident was witnessed by a store owner, who immediately confronted Soon-do. A scuffle broke out, but when the police arrived, the store owner was the one arrested for assaulting Soon-do, while Soon-do was taken to the hospital for treatment. The next day, Ji-young learned of the incident and was consumed with rage. Ara had been his neighbor, someone he cared for deeply. Seon-wook was equally furious upon hearing the news. When the weekend arrived, Seon-wook declined an invitation to go clubbing with friends, citing personal matters, while Ji-young also turned down the offer. On the other hand, Mir-yo told her team that the real vigilante would likely target Soon-do, the man responsible for Ara's death. She then instructed them to cover every corner of the hospital where Soon-do was being treated. At the hospital, Soon-do lay in a hospital room, guarded by a single police officer. Shortly after, the officer received a call informing him that his car in the parking lot had been hit. Distracted, The officer rushed to the parking lot, leaving Sundu alone. Seizing the opportunity, Ji-young appeared and confronted Sundu. At that moment, he told Sundu that he would spare his life if he confessed to his crimes during the trial. But if Sundu refused, Ji-young promised to return and finish him. Moments later, Jo-hyun arrived at the hospital and briefly crossed paths with Ji-young. As Ji-young walked away from the hospital, a sudden commotion broke out. Sundu fell from a window, plummeting to his death. It was revealed that the one responsible was none other than the fake vigilante. During this time, Ji-young caught a glimpse of the imposter fleeing the scene, jumping into an ambulance and speeding away. Without hesitation, Ji-young gave chase, eventually managing to catch up and enter the vehicle. To his surprise, the fake vigilante showed no fear at Ji-young's presence. Instead, he seemed delighted to finally meet the real vigilante. Shockingly, the imposter revealed that he already knew Ji-young's true identity. Later, the fake vigilante brought the ambulance to a stop in a secluded area and proposed a partnership, offering to assist Ji-young in his missions. But Ji-young, disgusted by the idea, immediately attacked the imposter. A fierce fight broke out between the two. Unexpectedly, the fake vigilante proved to be nearly as skilled in combat as Ji-young, but in the end, Ji-young gained the upper hand. In the end, he warned the imposter to stop imitating him and walked away, leaving the fake vigilante battered but alive. Meanwhile, Miryo had managed to capture footage of Ji-young in action. It was only a matter of time before she uncovered the true identity of the vigilante. Back at home, Ji-young received a message from the fake vigilante. The imposter asked if Ji-young needed an alibi for the bruises on his face, which could raise suspicions when he returned to the police academy. Ji-young ignored the message, choosing not to engage further. The next day, a young and influential conglomerate named Gangak is seen on his way to the media company. He was a powerful figure with a vast empire of companies. Surprisingly, Gangak was revealed to be the fake vigilante who had confronted Ji-young the previous night. Apparently, Gangak visited Miryo's media company, having heard that she possessed footage of the real vigilante in action. As Gangak walked through the office, everyone treated him with utmost respect, given his immense influence. When he met Miryo, Gangak explained that his purpose for visiting was to protect the identity of the vigilante. He expressed confidence that Miryo admired the vigilante's actions. Intrigued, Miryo asked why Gangak wanted to shield the vigilante's identity. At that moment, Gangak simply replied that she would understand his reasons in time. Before leaving, he took the flash drive containing the footage of the vigilante. Elsewhere, Jo-hyun arrived at the police academy to meet with Professor Junyo. As he walked through the campus, Jo-hyun accidentally crossed paths with Ji-young. At the same time, Ji-young grew visibly nervous, recognizing Jo-hyun as the man he had seen at the hospital. Jo-hyun, too, remembered Ji-young's face. During his meeting with Junyo, Jo-hyun shared his suspicion that the real vigilante might be a police officer. He requested the identities of all the students under Junyo's supervision. As a result, the two engaged in a lengthy discussion about the vigilante and his motives. Later that day, during class, Junyo took attendance and noticed the bruises on Ji-young's face. He asked Ji-young how he had gotten injured. In response, Ji-young quickly fabricated a story, claiming he had been in a judo match with a neighbor during the holiday. However, Junyo, aware of Ji-young's exceptional judo skills, found the explanation unconvincing. Unexpectedly, a staff member entered the classroom and informed Junyo that a police officer wanted to speak with Ji-young. Hearing this, Ji-young felt a surge of panic. However, when Ji-young and Junyo met the officer, it turned out the officer was only there to introduce Ji-young to a young woman named Young-ji, who wants to thank Ji-young for saving her the previous night from a group of thugs who had tried to harass her. At first, Ji-young was confused by Young-ji's story, but he soon realized she must have been sent by Gangak, the fake vigilante. Ji-young recalled that Gangak's earlier message offering him an alibi. Seizing the opportunity, Ji-young claimed that the bruises on his face were from the fight while helping Young-ji. This explanation satisfied Junyo, who stopped suspecting him. That night, while Ji-young was alone, he finally replied to Gangak's message, agreeing to meet him the following week. Gangak was thrilled by the response, as he had long idolized Jeong. A few days later, Miryo was visited by an old friend, a fellow journalist named Dae-suk. At that moment, Dae-suk informed her that a notorious mafia boss named Samdu had been released from prison despite his long list of crimes. Not only that, all the evidence against Samdu was in the hands of an artist named Jae-hak, who planned to expose Samdu's crimes the next day. It was revealed that Dae-suk invited Miryo to join him in meeting Jae-hak the following morning. Meanwhile, Samdu, freshly released from prison, was on his way to confront two men who had dared to report him to the police. Samdu then ordered his men to deliver the badly beaten men to a group of starving pigs, a grim fate that left no room for doubt about his cruelty. The next morning, Miryo and Dae-suk arrived at Jae-hak's house, expecting to gather evidence against Samdu. But when they entered, they found Jae-hak dead. In response, Miryo and Dae-suk immediately reported the incident to the police. But the officers concluded that Jae-hak's death was doing the unthinkable, not a murder. At that moment, Miryo tried to explain the connection between Jae-hak and Samdu, the recently freed mafia boss, but the police dismissed her claims. With no other option, Miryo told Dae-suk that they needed to investigate the case themselves. She was certain that Samdu's men were behind Jae-hak's death. Elsewhere, Ji-young and his two friends had just gotten off a bus and were heading home. As they walked, Young-ji, the girl who had claimed Ji-young saved her, approached him again. At that moment, Ji-young realized she was indeed sent by Gangak. Therefore, he agreed to go with her, but noticed Jo-hyun tailing them. To throw Jo-hyun off, Ji-young asked Young-ji to wait while he excused himself to use the restroom. As Ji-young was about to head to the restroom, Jo-hyun suddenly appeared before him. Unexpectedly, Jo-hyun asked Ji-young if he knew about Vigilante. Ji-young, trying to remain calm, replied that of course he knew about Vigilante. After all, the media had been covering him extensively. Besides, Ji-young had often been assigned by Junyob to write reports about Vigilante. Hearing this, Jo-hyun countered by saying that Vigilante possibly writes reports about himself. Jo-hyun then stepped closer, threatening Ji-young that if he continued his actions, he wouldn't hesitate to eliminate him. Realizing that his identity had been exposed, Ji-young defiantly challenged Jo-hyun, declaring that Vigilante wouldn't be defeated so easily. Hearing this, Jo-hyun clenched his fist, ready to strike Ji-young. However, he suddenly remembered a conversation he'd had with Junyob the previous day. In that conversation, Junyob had pointed out that if Vigilante's identity were revealed to be someone as upstanding as Ji-young, the public would only rally behind him even more. Moreover, Ji-young was one of their own, a police officer. Essentially, Jo-hyun and Junyob didn't want the public to discover that Vigilante was someone as virtuous as Ji-young. If that happened, it might inspire other young officers to follow in his footsteps and become new vigilantes. As Ji-young and Jo-hyun stood in tense confrontation, Gangak watched them from the shadows, unnoticed. In the end, Jo-hyun let Ji-young go, and Ji-young quickly invited Young-ji to dine at a restaurant. During their meal, Ji-young tried to pry information from Young-ji about Gangak's identity. However, Young-ji remained tight-lipped, refusing to reveal anything about Gangak. Just then, Ji-young received a call from Gangak, prompting him to step outside the restaurant to answer. During the call, Gangak immediately asked if Jo-hyun had discovered Ji-young's true identity. Ji-young confirmed it and requested that they avoid meeting for now. He also questioned Gangak about his true intentions. Gangak responded that he genuinely wanted to become Ji-young's ally, promising to help him resolve all his problems. Hearing this, Ji-young agreed to partner with Gangak on one condition. Gangak had to duplicate Jo-hyun's phone. Gangak smiled, as the task seemed trivial for someone with his skills. Before hanging up, Gangak added that Jo-hyun was merely a puppet of those in power. Meanwhile, Miryo and Dae-suk arrived at a harbor, having tracked Jae-hak's frequent visits to the location. When they opened one of the containers, they found it filled with dozens of computers, likely used by Jae-hak to operate an illegal gambling site. At that moment, Miryo quickly documented the scene, gathering as much information as she could. However, their investigation was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Mr. Bang, Samdu's right-hand man. Acting quickly, Mir-yo and Dae-suk tried to hide, but Mr. Bang had already detected their presence. In a brutal turn of events, Mr. Bang mercilessly killed Dae-suk, while Mir-yo managed to escape by rushing to their car. Fortunately, Mr. Bang couldn't stop her in time, and Mir-yo sped away from the scene. Later, Mir-yo returned to the harbor with a team of police officers. To her shock, the place had been completely cleared out. Not a single computer remained, and even Dae-suk's body had vanished. Mir-yo was stunned by how swiftly Mr. Bang had covered his tracks. She became convinced that Mr. Bang was acting on behalf of Samdu, further deepening the mystery surrounding their operations. Meanwhile, Jo-hyun was seen training rigorously. The words of Gang-ok, who had once called Jo-hyun a puppet of those in power, rang true. Jo-hyun received a call from a high-ranking police general named Jae-yob, his boss. At that moment, Jae-yob demanded to know why Jo-hyun had yet to capture Vigilante. Jo-hyun assured him to be patient, promising that Vigilante would soon be caught. Although Jo-hyun already knew that Ji-young was Vigilante, he had his own plans and chose not to reveal this to Jae-yob. On the other side, Ji-young was training with his friends. Shortly after, he received a message from Gang-ok, informing him that he had successfully duplicated Jo-hyun's phone as requested. Gang-ok also mentioned that the phone was now stored in a locker at Incheon Station. An hour later, Gang-ok was seen training intensely in martial arts. He pushed himself harder than ever, determined to prove himself worthy of becoming Vigilante's ally. Later, on his day off, Ji-young retrieved the phone from the locker at the station and brought it home. As he examined the device, his attention was diverted by a news report by Mir-yo. The report detailed the suspicious circumstances surrounding the death of Jae-hak and his connection to Samdu, the notorious crime boss. Mir-yo also revealed that Jae-hak had intended to expose Samdu's crimes before his untimely death. Furthermore, Jae-hak had left a message implicating Samdu in collusion with a high-ranking police officer referred to as the Rat. The news caused an uproar. Samdu, who had been relaxing, was abruptly contacted by the so-called Rat, none other than General Jae-yob. At that moment, Jae-yob ordered Samdu to take immediate action to contain the fallout. Under pressure from Jae-yob, the media company where Mir-yo worked was reprimanded for publishing the report. Mir-yo was also suspended from her duties as a journalist. At the same time, Samdu instructed Mr. Bang to send someone to eliminate Mir-yo. Hours later, as Mir-yo was heading home, she was suddenly attacked by the man sent by Mr. Bang. Fortunately, Jo-hyun, who happened to be nearby, intervened and saved her. Jo-hyun warned Mir-yo that if she wanted to live peacefully, she should stop baiting Vigilante. After subduing the attacker, Jo-hyun tied him up and interrogated him. The man, named Sun Bum, initially refused to talk, but eventually confessed under duress that he had been sent by Mr. Bang, also known as the Hitman. In the end, Jo-hyun forced Sun Bum to lead him to Mr. Bang's hideout. When they arrived, Mr. Bang was nowhere to be found, but his henchmen were present. Despite being outnumbered, Jo-hyun took them all down single-handedly. The police soon arrived and secured the scene. The next day, the police, under Jo-hyun's orders, announced that they had captured Vigilante the previous night and that there would be no more Vigilantes. In reality, the men Jo-hyun had defeated were framed as Vigilante, portrayed as an organized group of criminals. The police also claimed to have found a large stash of drugs at the scene, further tarnishing Vigilante's image. The public was led to believe that the admired Vigilante was nothing more than a criminal syndicate. Mir-yo, watching the news, was convinced that the police were spreading false information about Vigilante. At the same time, Ji-young finally understood Jo-hyun's true intentions. By not arresting him, Jo-hyun aimed to discredit Vigilante in the eyes of the public, framing him as part of an organized crime ring. A few days later, Ji-young resumed his mission, punishing another criminal who had just been released. Coincidentally, the man was one of Samdu's underlings. While carrying out his act of justice, Ji-young stumbled upon a notebook detailing all of Samdu's hidden assets. Without hesitation, Ji-young eliminated the man. Meanwhile, Mir-yo was fired by her boss, who dismissed her reports on the Vigilante as nothing but sensational nonsense. Mir-yo tried to defend herself, insisting that the police's recent claims about the vigilante were false. But her boss had already made up his mind and refused to listen. As Mirio was leaving the office, she overheard breaking news. The vigilante had struck again. This proved that the police's earlier report about the vigilante was fabricated, as the real vigilante was still active. Mirio couldn't help but smile, knowing this revelation had silenced her boss, who had just fired her. At the same time, Gangak applauded Ji-young's actions, growing even more impressed by his resolve. On the other hand, Sam-do, who was busy polishing his public image at a church, received alarming news from his men. The notebook containing details of all his assets had been taken by the vigilante. Panicked, Sam-do immediately ordered his subordinates to move his assets overseas. Meanwhile, Jo-hyun confronted Ji-young. Frustrated, Jo-hyun vented his anger, reminding Ji-young how he had gone out of his way to frame someone else as the vigilante to protect him. Yet, Ji-young had recklessly resumed his act, ignoring Jo-hyun's warnings to stop. Ji-young calmly replied that he knew Jo-hyun's actions weren't sincere, but were instead orchestrated by someone else. He explained that he would continue being the vigilante as long as the law failed to deliver justice fairly. The system, he argued, was lenient toward the powerful and wealthy, but harsh on the poor and weak. For that reason, Ji-young vowed to keep punishing criminals who refused to repent. Hearing this, Jo-hyun warned Ji-young that his self-righteousness would only turn him into a monster. Enraged, Ji-young suddenly attacked, but Jo-hyun, being the more skilled fighter, easily overpowered him. Jo-hyun then told Ji-young that if he stopped being the vigilante, he could become an exceptional police officer, far better than Jo-hyun himself. But Ji-young firmly stated that he no longer cared about others' opinions. To defeat evil, he believed he had to become evil himself. As a result, he challenged Jo-hyun to prove the existence of true justice if he wanted him to stop. Stunned by Ji-young's unwavering determination, Jo-hyun reluctantly let him go. The next day, Jo-hyun was summoned by Jae-yob, who informed him that he was being removed from the vigilante case as another officer would take over. At that moment, Jo-hyun suspected that the real reason for his dismissal wasn't his failure to capture the vigilante, but Jae-yob's fear that Jo-hyun might uncover his ties to Sam-do. Determined to uncover the truth, Jo-hyun visited Sun-bum to ask if Jae-yob was involved with Sam-do's Mafia group. However, Sun-bum admitted that he didn't know, but suggested that Mr. Bang might have the answers. Unfortunately, Sun-bum had no idea where Mr. Bang was. On the other side, Ji-young was seen recovering from the beating he had taken from Jo-hyun the previous day, with Gangak by his side, tending to his wounds. Gangak was deeply impressed by Ji-young, having witnessed the heated argument between him and Jo-hyun. Overwhelmed with admiration, Gangak even took a photo with Ji-young, seeing him as his idol. Afterward, Gangak left, allowing Ji-young to rest. Not long after, Ji-young regained consciousness and turned on the news, which was usually hosted by Mirio. This time, however, the media outlet was issuing an apology to Sam-do for tarnishing his reputation and placing all the blame on Mirio. Seeing this, Ji-young immediately sent a message to Gangak, asking him to prepare a special broadcasting studio for Mirio. For Gangak, a powerful conglomerate, this request was easy to fulfill. Soon, Mirio was summoned by Gangak and given her own studio, where she could freely report the news without interference. At that moment, Mirio questioned Gangak about why he had gone to such lengths for her. However, Gangak simply replied that he didn't want the vigilante's efforts to go to waste. Without delay, Mirio launched her first broadcast, declaring that she would continue to expose the crimes committed by Sam-do and the so-called Rat General. She also made it clear that she would never doing the unthinkable. No matter what happened, and if she were found dead, it would undoubtedly be the work of those who wanted to silence her. General Jae-yob and Sam-do, watching Mirio's broadcast, were thrown into a panic. They hadn't expected to be challenged so boldly. Around the same time, a new police officer named Yoon-gil was introduced as the leader of the team, replacing Jo-hyun. Apparently, Yoon-gil was highly intelligent and skilled in martial arts, nearly on par with Jo-hyun. The next day, Ji-young, now fully recovered, returned home. He reopened the notebook he had taken from the last man he had dealt with and discovered a crucial piece of information. Samdu and General Jayob had hidden their assets in a church where Samdu often staged his public appearances. Without wasting any time, Ji-young headed to the church and successfully retrieved a flash drive containing evidence of Samdu's crimes. However, his actions were witnessed by someone, prompting Ji-young to chase after them. Unexpectedly, the person turned out to be Gangak, who explained that he had only followed Ji-young out of curiosity and admiration. The two of them struck up a conversation, and Ji-young began to see Gangak as a true ally. This acknowledgement filled Gangak with joy. Moments later, Ji-young handed over the flash drive to Gangak, instructing him to deliver it to Miryo. Before leaving, Gangak vowed to stand by Ji-young no matter what. The following day, Junyob entered his office, only to be startled by the presence of Yoon-gil, who had been waiting for him. Yoon-gil explained that he had come to request student records, as he was convinced that the Vigilante was a police officer. Just then, Ji-young appeared to inform Junyob that his students were waiting for him in class. At that moment, Yoon-gil, locking eyes with Ji-young, gave him a serious look before excusing himself, though he made it clear he would return. Several days later, on a day off, Ji-young visited the church again, this time with the intention of eliminating the pastor there. The pastor, Jong-un, was one of Samdu's right-hand men, instrumental in carrying out his criminal activities. After Ji-young dealt with Jong-un, the Vigilante's reputation took a hit in the eyes of the public. Jong-un had been widely known as a generous and kind-hearted pastor, and Ji-young's actions seemed unjustified and brutal. The lack of a clear reason for the killing only fueled the public's distrust, casting a shadow over the Vigilante's mission. Meanwhile, Samdu was seething with rage. Jong-un had been the one person who knew where all his assets were hidden. Determined to take control of the situation, Samdu ordered General Jayob to stand down for 5 days. In that time, Samdu planned to eliminate Miryo, the Vigilante, and Jo-hyun. He believed that Jo-hyun posed a significant threat to their operations. Elsewhere, Miryo met with Gangak to retrieve the flash drive Ji-young had provided, which contained evidence explaining why the Vigilante had targeted Jong-un. As she took the flash drive, Miryo realized that Gangak likely knew the true identity of the Vigilante. However, she chose not to press him for answers. That evening, Miryo prepared to broadcast the reasons behind the Vigilante's actions. But just as she was about to reveal the contents of the flash drive, her broadcast was abruptly interrupted. The person responsible was none other than Jo-hyun. At that moment, Jo-hyun warned Miryo that if she continued to expose Samdu, she would be signing her own death warrant. Miryo, however, stood her ground, telling Jo-hyun that she wasn't foolish and was fully aware of the risks. Impressed by her resolve, Jo-hyun left without further argument. But as he was about to get into his car, 2 men ambushed him. The attackers were none other than Mr. Bang and one of his highly skilled henchmen. A fierce fight broke out, and despite Jo-hyun's efforts, Mr. Bang, armed with a blade, managed to injure him. Just as Mr. Bang was about to deliver the final blow, the Vigilante appeared, forcing Mr. Bang and his accomplice to flee. The next day, Jo-hyun was seen recovering in a hospital bed. Gangak, who had learned that Ji-young had saved Jo-hyun, questioned him about his motives. Unexpectedly, Ji-young explained that he intended to turn Jo-hyun into someone like himself, a vigilante who dispensed justice in his own way. Meanwhile, Samdu was furious with Mr. Bang for failing to eliminate Jo-hyun. At that moment, Mr. Bang could only apologize, knowing he had let his boss down. That night, Samdu's men were busy transferring his virtual currency assets when an explosion rocked the area. Emerging from the chaos was Ji-young, who swiftly dealt with Samdu's men and seized the virtual currency. After completing his mission, Ji-young instructed Miryo to broadcast a message. The Vigilante demanded that Samdu and the Rat General confess to their crimes. If they refused, Ji-young vowed to donate all the seized virtual currency to orphanages. Following the broadcast, Ji-young contacted Gangak and asked him to protect Miryo, knowing she would become a prime target for Samdu. Hearing the task, Gangak agreed without hesitation. Unbeknownst to them, Sonwook was secretly watching Ji-young from the shadows. Shortly after, Samdu's men arrived at the building where Miryo conducted her broadcasts. Their mission was clear: eliminate Miryo for her daring threats against Samdu and Jae-yob. Sensing the danger, Miryo quickly set up cameras in the room, preparing to document whatever came next. As Samdu's men ransacked Miryo's broadcasting studio, Miryo secretly initiated a live broadcast, ensuring the public witnessed the chaos unfolding in real time. Among the viewers was Yoon-gil, the new regional team leader who had replaced Jo-hyun. However, Miryo's luck ran out when Samdu's men eventually caught her and destroyed the phone she had used for the broadcast. Just as they were about to take her away to eliminate her, the Vigilante appeared, or so it seemed. In reality, it was Gang-ok, who had come to rescue Miryo on the orders of Ji-young. At that moment, Gang-ok mercilessly took down Samdu's men, leaving only one survivor. Initially, Miryo suspected Gang-ok might be the Vigilante, but Gang-ok clarified that he was merely acting on the Vigilante's behalf. Not long after, the police, led by Yoon-gil, arrived at the scene. By the time they entered the studio, however, the situation had already been resolved. As a result, Yoon-gil promptly took Miryo to the police station for questioning. Meanwhile, Ji-young had sneaked out of the academy dormitory to ensure Miryo was safe. He felt a wave of relief upon seeing her unharmed and in the company of Yoon-gil. At the police station, Yoon-gil questioned Miryo about the identity of her rescuer. He suspected that Miryo had been colluding with the Vigilante and that the person who saved her was none other than the Vigilante himself. Miryo, however, insisted she didn't know whether her rescuer was the Vigilante or not, only that he had saved her life. After the interrogation, Miryo returned to her apartment and tried to relax with a warm bath. But her peace was short-lived when the lights suddenly went out. The next day, as Ji-young was in class, Yoon-gil showed up to question him. In Junyob's office, Yoon-gil directly accused Ji-young of being the Vigilante. Ji-young calmly responded, asking why he was being suspected and what evidence there was to support the claim. In response, Yoon-gil pointed out that the Vigilante's physique matched Ji-young's and that data from Jo-hyun's computer also pointed to Ji-young. Yoon-gil then pressed Ji-young about his whereabouts the previous night, knowing he had left the dormitory. Yoon-gil suspected Ji-young had gone to save Miryo. Unfazed, Ji-young replied that while he had indeed left the dormitory, his activities were a private matter. Junyob stepped in to defend Ji-young, urging Yoon-gil to gather solid evidence before making accusations. However, Yoon-gil revealed that everything would soon come to light. The virtual currency stolen by the Vigilante had been accessed using a phone, and that phone had been traced to the police academy. Yoon-gil added that the central IT team would finish tracking the phone by the next day, and the truth would be revealed. The next day, on a holiday, Ji-young was seen planning something with Gang-ok. However, his plans were interrupted when he received a call from Son-wook, who had stayed behind at the academy dormitory. Son-wook informed Ji-young that Yoon-gil and the police were conducting a thorough search of every room in the academy. As a result, Ji-young fell silent, realizing there was little he could do. Meanwhile, Yoon-gil, who was searching Ji-young's dorm room, received a report from his team that the IT unit had pinpointed the exact location of the phone. Surprisingly, the location led to the office of the academy's rector, none other than General Ji-yob. Without hesitation, Yoon-gil barged into the rector's office, determined to find the evidence they were seeking. Meanwhile, Ji-young explained to Gang-ok that the police, led by Yoon-gil, were searching the academy. He revealed that he had deliberately lured Yoon-gil by accessing Samdu's virtual currency from within the police academy. Using a special phone belonging to the general, the same phone that Jae-yob used to communicate with Samdu. Hearing this, Gang-ok couldn't help but admire Ji-young's cunning and intelligence. Not long after, Yoon-gil finally found the phone he had been searching for. Just as he did, General Jae-yob walked in and caught Yoon-gil red-handed, holding the device. Without hesitation, General Jae-yob ordered everyone else to leave the room, as he needed to have a private conversation with Yoon-gil. At that moment, General Jae-yob, who had been using the phone to communicate with Samdu, was visibly panicked. Realizing the gravity of the situation, General Jae-yob offered Yoon-gil a bribe, money or a promotion, in exchange for the phone. But Yoon-gil was an honest police officer, unwavering in his principles. He firmly replied that he was only doing his duty and intended to hand the phone over to the digital forensics team to uncover the truth. As soon as Young-gil left, General J-Yob wasted no time. He ordered one of his men to eliminate Young-gil before he could deliver the phone to the forensics team. The scene then shifted to Young-gil, who was on his way to the forensics office. But his journey was cut short when a truck suddenly rammed into his car, sending it tumbling off the road. In the end, Young-gil met his tragic fate at the hands of General J-Yob's men. Meanwhile, Jo-hyun was recovering from his injuries when he received devastating news from a fellow officer. Young-gil had been killed. The revelation hit Jo-hyun hard, as Young-gil had been one of his closest friends. At the same time, Ji-young was equally shaken. He hadn't anticipated that his plan to trap General J-Yob would lead to Young-gil's death. That night, as Ji-young was preparing to leave, Jo-hyun confronted him. Jo-hyun demanded to know if Ji-young was responsible for Young-gil's death. With no other option, Ji-young explained everything, revealing the truth behind the events. But even after hearing the full story, Jo-hyun insisted that Ji-young stop his vigilante activities. Unexpectedly, Ji-young responded with a chilling ultimatum. If Jo-hyun wanted to stop him, he would have to kill him right then and there, and Ji-young wouldn't resist. But if Jo-hyun couldn't bring himself to do it, then they would have to work together to expose General J-Yob's crimes. Elsewhere, Mr. Bang and his men had successfully kidnapped Miryo. The next day, Gangak and his team grew suspicious when Miryo didn't respond to any messages. They forced their way into her apartment, only to find it in complete disarray. Gangak immediately realized that Miryo had been taken. As a result, he quickly contacted Ji-young to inform him of the situation. Meanwhile, Miryo was being interrogated by Mr. Bang. He pressed her for information about the true identity of the vigilante, but Miryo genuinely didn't know anything. In a surprising turn of events, the vigilante, Ji-young, offered Samdu a deal. He would exchange Miryo for access to the virtual funds he had previously stolen. Intrigued, Samdu agreed, and they arranged to meet at Seoul's soccer stadium the following night. After the call, Samdu contacted Mr. Bang, instructing him to bring Miryo to the stadium. However, Mr. Bang demanded an exorbitant fee for his cooperation, leaving Samdu with no choice but to agree. Back at the hideout, Ji-young and Gangak were busy strategizing their next move. Unbeknownst to them, Sunwook was secretly watching their every move, his intentions unclear. The next day, Mr. Bang informed Miryo that she would be exchanged for access to the virtual funds. Upon hearing this, Miryo couldn't help but laugh. She hadn't expected the criminal case surrounding her to escalate to such an absurd level. Meanwhile, Samdu and his men arrived at Seoul Stadium early to take control of the CCTV systems. As night fell, Samdu was caught off guard when a crowd of people suddenly began pouring into the stadium, all dressed like the vigilante. His confusion deepened when he noticed a festival bus parked nearby. It didn't take long for Samdu to realize that a music festival was being held inside the stadium, a clever ploy orchestrated by Ji-young with the help of Gangak, the wealthy conglomerate. With his vast resources, Gangak could easily arrange a festival anywhere, anytime. Elsewhere, Mr. Bang and his men arrived at the location with Miryo in tow. The music festival was in full swing, and Mr. Bang led his men through the crowd, searching for the vigilante. Not only that, Samdu and Mr. Bang also kept a close eye on Miryo from a distance. Despite this, Ji-young managed to outsmart Mr. Bang's men, slipping through the chaos to rescue Miryo and escort her to the parking lot. At the same time, Gangak confronted Samdu and his men, deliberately luring them toward the parking lot as well. What followed was a tense chase between Gangak and Samdu's Mafia group. Back in the parking lot, Ji-young instructed Miryo to start a live broadcast. Once the stream was live, Ji-young climbed onto a bus and faced off against Mr. Bang's men. Moments later, Mr. Bang himself arrived to join the fight, determined to take down Ji-young. The live broadcast caught the attention of Jo-hyun, who finally realized what Ji-young was up to. Meanwhile, General J-Yob was having dinner with his superior, Shung Cheol, a 4-star police general. Shung Cheol was the mastermind behind General J-Yob's criminal activities, as he was preparing to run for president. To fund his campaign, Shung Cheol had ordered General J-Yob to collaborate with the Mafia, ensuring a steady flow of illicit income. Suddenly, Shang Qiul's men reported that the Vigilante and Samdu's group were engaged in a fierce battle at Seoul Stadium. Hearing this, Shang Qiul immediately ordered General Jae-yob to go to the stadium and clean up the mess. Back at the stadium, Samdu's men had surrounded Gangok and Ji-young. Just as the fight reached its peak, a car suddenly appeared, crashing into Mr. Bang's men. The car was driven by Jo Hyun, who had arrived with Sun Bum and another ally. Jo Hyun demanded that Samdu and his men surrender, but Samdu refused, confident in his numerical advantage. As a result, he ordered his men to attack Jo Hyun instead. By this point, Ji-young was exhausted, yet he continued to fend off Samdu's relentless attacks. Just as Samdu closed in, ready to deliver the final blow, someone unexpectedly intervened to save Ji-young. However, the rescuer was stabbed by Samdu in the process. Surprisingly, the person who had risked their life for Ji-young was none other than his close friend, Seon-wook. As it turned out that Seon-wook had already figured out that the Vigilante was none other than Ji-young. Shortly after, the police arrived to intervene and stop the chaos. However, Samdu quickly fled toward the underground facility. Seeing this, Ji-young asked Mir-yo to stay behind and help Seon-wook while he went after Samdu. In a matter of moments, Ji-young entered the underground area, while Gangok did his best to hold off Samdu's men, who were hot on Ji-young's trail. Inside, Ji-young found himself face-to-face with both Samdu and Mr. Bang. But before the situation could escalate further, Jo Hyun arrived to back up Ji-young. The confrontation split into two battles. Jo Hyun took on Mr. Bang, while Ji-young faced off against Samdu. In the midst of their fight, they were interrupted by the sudden arrival of General Jae-yob, who coldly declared that Samdu had failed and, without hesitation, executed him on the spot. Then, in a ruthless move, the general activated a water system, flooding the area and trapping Ji-young, Jo Hyun, and Mr. Bang in the rising water. To make matters worse, the general began firing at them. Fortunately, his shots missed their marks. As General Jae-yob paused to reload his weapon, Ji-young seized the opportunity. He climbed out of the water, cornered the general, and unleashed his fury, beating him mercilessly. Just as Ji-young was about to deliver the final blow, Jo Hyun stopped him, insisting that General Jae-yob should face justice in court. At the same time, Mr. Bang taunted Ji-young and Jo Hyun, leading to a chaotic three-way fight. Unexpectedly, General Jae-yob managed to retrieve his gun and fired at all three of them. Jo Hyun was hit in the arm, but the injury only fueled his determination. He quickly closed the distance and, without hesitation, ended General Jae-yob's life. The next day, Gangok regained consciousness and immediately asked his men about Ji-young's condition. They assured him that Ji-young was fine. Meanwhile, Ji-young was consumed by grief. His best friend, Seon-wook, had tragically lost his life during the previous night's events. Elsewhere, Mir-yo confided in Jo Hyun, revealing that he too had become a vigilante alongside Ji-young. The following day, General Shang Qiul publicly announced that General Jae-yob had been killed in an attack by a group of criminals. Watching the news, Ji-young realized the truth. The mastermind behind all the crimes committed by Samdu and General Jae-yob was none other than General Shang Qiul. In a final scene, Ji-young and other cadets were being sworn in as officers. However, when it came time to pledge loyalty to the nation and his superiors, Ji-young remained silent, his expression unreadable. And with that, the story of the Vigilante came to an end. So the moral from the story is, if you steal a phone, make sure it doesn't belong to a crime boss, or you'll end up fighting in a flooded stadium while your friend live streams it. Also, always check if your pastor is secretly a Mafia member. Justice is messy, but at least you'll get a good workout.